Hello there and welcome back to the channel where we are going to be evaluating and looking at a relatively obscure, only once seen vessel in Stargate. This was a alien human built spacecraft, as you may know. Many of the alien races in Stargate were actually humans. It originated from a planet of unknown origin, or markedly we don't know what they called it. It's simply referred to as Martin's planet, and that would be Martin Lloyd, an alien human living on Earth, pretending to be a Tauri from Earth while actually being an alien human from another world. His people were destroyed by the Goa'uld, a race that until that point they'd never actually encountered. The Goa'uld turned up and attempted to force them to worship them as gods. His people would resist and fight the Goa'uld unsuccessfully. This was one of several ships that they sent out looking for allies in their war against them. This particular vessel finding Earth, but also finding Earth, although populated by humans at a relatively advanced technological state, nowhere near technologically sophisticated enough to be of any aid to them in their war with the Goa'uld. Realizing the fate of their people was basically set, they decided to take for lack of a better word, the coward's way out. Instead of return home to continue fighting, they just stayed at Earth. They took a escape pod down to the planet and left their ship in orbit of Mars for the next 5 years. So, with that said, a little intro and backstory as to where the ship came from and how it ended up in Earth's solar system. Let's get into the story of this ship. As stated, this vessel was human-built by an alien race of humans. Possibly humans that were descended from humans from Earth in the first place, but had reached a level of technology that was unacceptable by Goa'uld standards. Although they would not surrender and were, as far as we can tell, all but wiped out. It's possible there were other survivors, other ships that escaped, possibly even some that escaped through the Stargate. They may have even had other world colonies, but quite frankly, we simply don't know. We don't even know what they were actually called. The ship was believed to have been destroyed. That Martin said that there was some kind of accident on board, he thought, and that's why him and the other 4 survivors came down to live on Earth. But he didn't like just staying on Earth. He wanted to return home and continue to fight. The others didn't want to do that, but instead of do something really nasty like kill him, they basically suppressed his memory and then kept an eye on him. But his dogged determination and feeling that something was wrong and needing to return eventually led him to uncover the truth and actually contact the SGC. They would find the escape pod, which was a small plane-like craft, sublight only as far as we can tell, that was 16 feet long by 10 feet wide and maybe held a crew of 4 or 5 by human evaluation, which turned out to be pretty spot on, quite frankly. How many of these small craft the ship had is unknown, but it definitely had one that was ultimately left on Earth. They left the ship on a timer in orbit of Mars so it wouldn't be detected by humans on Earth, and then it would return if things didn't work out on Earth for the best and they could leave again. It had some pretty spectacular technology. Although it did take it several days to get from Mars to Earth, this could mean that it was only taking a leisurely pace. It wasn't going at full speed. But either way, 3 days between Earth and Mars is still pretty fast by Earth standards at the time. The ship's size we will get to, but its actual technological capabilities, we saw it be able to enter planetary atmosphere but no need to land, as this race had transporter technology that was notably more advanced than the one used by the Goa'uld. It was armed with at least 4 particle cannons, 2 mounted in the main hull and 2 mounted on a sort of swivel section that could move around the ship. It may have had additional armaments, we simply don't know. The vessel was defended by shields and of course had advanced energy weapons capabilities. It had no stealth technology that we are aware of, and it's not entirely clear if this was a true combat vessel or if it was some kind of an armed explorer. It's likely it was some kind of cruiser run by these people. It needed a minimum crew of about 4 or 5 people to operate, but seemingly could be operated by the 3 remaining of Martin's people that went aboard the ship and left ultimately. We don't know the fate of the ship beyond that. Other capabilities of the vessel, as I said, it was definitely hyperspace capable, although this wasn't stated. It must have had some kind of FTL. It was likely hyperspace. Hyperdrive technology is the most ubiquitous, but we simply don't know that for a 100% certainty. Circling back to the ship's size, now I actually found a few different measurements for how big the ship may have been, but none of them quite make sense. So if we assume that all these little windows are windows on the ship, these light points are windows, and we take a bit of logic that those windows represent decks, then although I can't say exactly how big this ship is, saying it's 40, 50 meters long, like some of the measurements say online, doesn't quite make sense. It would have to be substantially larger than this. The vessel also seemed quite large, although there was a bit of a perspective issue when we see it descending into Earth's atmosphere. I also question how long range the transporter systems were, as the vessel did seem to need to enter the atmosphere, but it was on autopilot. It could be remote controlled, and they didn't have the remote, so maybe it should have stayed in orbit and beamed them up from there. Or perhaps it simply didn't have that range and needed to be relatively close. We're not entirely clear again. But either way, a very advanced and impressive looking starship, generally an oval or sort of leaf-like shape, very smooth hull, and a sort of a dark coloration. But otherwise, we know relatively little about it. It is a beautiful looking vessel, though, indicating his people used both a sense of aesthetic in their ship designs as well as functionality, whereas Earth would build vessels that are very pragmatic in appearance. This ship held elements of both, and in my opinion was a very impressive ship. It was actually only seen in one episode of SG1. We never have any follow-up. In fact, I couldn't even find much in the way of beta canon on this ship to expand on its lore. So if you know any beta canon sources of what happened to this ship, let me know in the comment section below, because I'd be fascinated to find out myself. Very impressive starship. What happened to it after it left Earth in canon, alpha canon anyway, is unknown. We never saw his people again. Martin remained on Earth and continued to live out his life while these other people left and went to find a new life on a new world somewhere else. Hopefully they made it.
Just a couple of auxiliary observations here, mostly because my battery died on my camera, so I couldn't carry on. This ship has a few interesting little details just to pick up on looking at it. The inside of that swivel arm has several sort of pale orange emanations coming from it that could be reverse engines or some kind of intakes of some kind. Their exact function is unknown. The swivel also seems to go into that position when the vessel enters flight mode. It's not clear if it can actually still propel itself while in its sort of flat mode, or whether or not it needs to swivel that section around for the engines to work. Noting the engines, even though again, just pointing out, the vessel did descend into the atmosphere and swivel it back around when it's into sort of sitting mode, there are no actual visible sublight engines on this ship, or hyperdrive engines for that matter. We have to assume it has them, because otherwise it never would have reached Earth's system, but the sublight engines are a little bit more of an obvious mystery. Exactly what is propelling this thing? We know that as a power source it uses something not unlike Naquadah, but it seems to have something in common with Goa'uld vessels in that it doesn't have an obvious glowing thruster assembly or something, which are the sublight engines, which does imply it's using some kind of very advanced sublight propulsion system, but not entirely clear. It's just that little observations of the ship. It also, of course, has for that swivel section a large anchoring point, which is in a cutout of the vessel, like a sort of like a plug or an impeller sort of embedded into the ship, which turns with it at up to the 90 degrees that they seem to be able to turn. It's again not clear if they can continue to turn and end up on the other side, or if because of the internal deck layouts that's perhaps not a bad idea, or if perhaps these sections of the ship aren't even inhabited. As I said, just a few last observations I had to throw in because my battery had died and I moved on to other things when I came to editing this. So there we go. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.